Hi, my name is Cindy Rang from the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net, and today we are going to continue working on our Westport block of the month, and we're going to do block number 4. All right. Block number 4. So again, behind me is, if you've purchased a kit from me or your local quilt shop, you may have received the Hoffman colors, and your fabric will look like this. As we're sewing through this, we're doing a bunch of scrappy things, so we'll have a couple to compare. You're either going to be working on the king size, which means you're going to make a few more blocks, or you're making on the twin, which is what's shown behind me. So block number 4, it is true that for this one, you're going to make 2 blocks for the twin or 3 blocks for the for the king size. And block number 4 looks like this. And so depending upon which colors, if you're doing the cool colors or the warm colors, both are pictured on your pattern. And if you have either purchased the kit from us or from the shop, it'll show you the colors that you're using. Or if you're selecting things from home, this will be a nice little reference for you for when you're going to use something that's a little bit more of a zinger or a medium or a dark. So looking right at the pattern, I'm going to go ahead and show you the colors that we've picked out of our scrap pile. Okay, you should have your pattern in front of you, and it's going to talk to you about the strips that you're going to need. So for me, this was my fabric number 1, which is my background, and I have 2 different strips. This is my fabric number 4, which is going to be my center piece, and it had me cut a strip, but I just went ahead and cut that into my square. And then fabric number 5 is my 2 strips. I have kind of this wide strip and a smaller strip, and fabric number 5 is going to be the outer ring right here. It kind of looks a little bit darker. It's the darkest of all of these. And then my last fabric, and again, they call it fabric number 9 when they're putting everything together. So again, if you have our kit, you'll know which one you're supposed to be grabbing. Fabric number 9 is just going to be this little center, the center in here. So what I would suggest is that you go ahead and cut your strips, and then when you've cut your strips, it's going to talk about cross cutting. So when we've cut our large strip, it's going to tell me that I need to cut 8 pieces off of this. And what I would do for each one, go ahead and take your friction marker, because then you can remove your mark afterwards if you'd like to do that, and just check everything off as you're cutting all of those pieces that you need. I'm going to go ahead and cut these into the sections that I need, and then I'm going to be right back. Okay, on second thought, we decided to cut these together with you because we're going to go ahead and show you how she makes her half square triangles. If you've looked ahead at this pattern, you've seen that what we're going to be doing is cutting the half square triangles and sewing triangle bits onto triangle bits. We're going to go ahead and do this block this way, and then in future blocks I'm going to show you a couple of other options, but we're going to go ahead and cut this together. So this is one of the rulers that she suggests. You can see that this is my 3.5 inch strip, and then what I've done is I've cut off my selvage. I'm going to go ahead and line this up. You can see the blunt tip is up here at the top, and you can see right down here I'm right on that 3.5 inch line, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Actually, that might be backwards for you, but it'll be the same way. Right now, it's going to be front ways for you. We're going to see it again. I'm right on that 3.5 inch line, and I have my little blunt tip up here, and then I'll keep going. She's telling you to cut 8 of these because you're going to make 2 blocks, or you would cut 4 more if you're making 3 blocks. And here's your little half square triangle section. Okay, I'm going to put these aside, and then our next one, if we look at our pattern, she says to cut our 2-inch strip out of our background. She of course calls it fabric number 1, and she is telling us to cut 8 2-inch 90 quarter square triangles, QST. And remember that in the beginning, she suggested to get her set of rulers. This was the 45 degree. There's also the 90 degree one, and it's a smaller one. You might have one of these. There's a Nifty Notions ruler. There's an easy angle. So we'll be using a couple different ones, but for this one, I just want to show you. Hers is exactly the same as this. This is just the one that I picked up. They're all marked the same, where there's your 2-inch line, and again it has that little blunt tip up at the top. Here's my 2-inch strip, and all I'm going to do is line that up, the blunt strip at the top, the 2 down here. I'm going to avoid my selvage just a little bit, and I'm going to cut here and here, and this is garbage. And then I'm going to turn this one around, line that up, and do the same thing. If you're used to a ruler that doesn't slip, and this is slipping some for you, there's a couple of things that you can do on the back side of your ruler. Is the grippy. You might also have little sandpaper things. There's a couple different things you can do, but just if you've not done anything, be kind of careful about any slippage. And then you're going to cut, I think she tells us to cut 8 of them. And you notice whenever I'm cutting, I always make sure that I've made the cut before I move my ruler. So I'm going to cut and make sure, and you can see there's some little, probably need to change my blade. And I'll keep doing this. So I need 4 of those for one of the blocks. I think that I need 8 total. Then I'm going to mark this off. The next thing is I need 16 2-inch 45 half square triangles. And so then we're going to go back to the one we were doing before. So you can do this one, or I'm going to go ahead and use this one. I'm going to go ahead and, just to make it easier and less confusing, I am just going to square up my end, lay this down, and you can see that here's my blunt tip. This is lining up 2 inches. There's 1. All right, once you have all of those done, with the rest of your strip, you can go ahead now and cut this into 2-inch squares. And if you have kind of a funny edge over here, I usually will just cut it off, and then I have my nice edge. And I think I need 8 of these. I'm going to turn that off. Okay, after those squares are done, then the next thing is, again, I mentioned in the other blocks not to cut your 1.5-inch strips yet. Your 1.5-inch strips are your block sashing. I usually do that at the end, and I actually am cutting mine 2 inches so that if something weird happens in my piecing in here, when I press it, I still have a block that ends up the size that it's supposed to, because I would rather trim some off of my outside block sashing than to have to lose any points in the inside. So I always put this off to the end, or go ahead and just cut a 2-inch strip for that. Then we're off to fabric number 4. Fabric number 4, we just need our center squares. That's going to be piece number G. And then it's on to piece number 5. Piece number 5, we're going to do it really pretty much similarly. we have our 3.5 inch strip. And from our 3.5 inch strip, we're going to cut 48 45-degree half square triangles, the same way we did before. And these are our piece number H. And then out of our 2 inch, we again need all of those quarter square triangles, and we need 8 of them for piece number I. Okay, after we've cut those, finally, out of what they are calling fabric number 9, this is our choice. We're going to start with our 2 inch strip, and we're going to cut, oops, here we are, 16 45 half square triangles. So that's back to, could be this ruler, whichever one you want. Okay, a couple things. First, I just want to mention that I went ahead and removed my marks, and I also wanted to mention that I am making the twin, which is why I'm cutting everything up here. If you are making the king size, these are your cutting directions down here. So it's just a different quantity of how many I'm cutting to be able to make 2 blocks and how many pieces you're cutting to be able to make 3 blocks, or vice versa. So then if we flip this over on the back, I'm just going to show you up close some of the things. So she's going to have you piece certain things in certain orders. I just want to show you kind of what that looks like. So she's going to have you start with these pieces. I laid the whole block out just so you can see kind of where everything goes. So you can see these are those quarter square triangle blocks that we cut, and these are your half square 45-degree half square triangles that we cut. So you can see here I did 16 because I'm making 2 blocks, but for each block I need 8 of them. Here's my 4 background quarter square triangles. Here are my 4 quarter square triangles here, and my 8 half square triangles, all that are right here. And then here's those great big half square triangles. Now I want to show you something. When you cut that, you could see that we ended up with a blunt end and a sharp end. So there's 2 ways to do this. The way that I prefer is when I flip this over, what you can see is that this is lined up here, and over here you have this little dog ear that's lined up there. And so then what will happen is I'm going to start sewing right there, and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch all the way down to there. So all I have is this one little fleck of a dog ear on one side and one little piece on the other side. Your other option is, if you noticed, I sometimes cut where I had right sides together. So let's look at this one. Your other option is you might have a blunt end on the same side and your pointed end on the opposite side. That is equally okay. This isn't necessarily the way that I prefer it, but you can do it either way. And then what you're going to do is you'll end up starting here when you're doing your 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's going to put you right there, all the way down off of this edge. All right, so what we're going to do first is I'm just going to show you there's one other little step right here. So after we sew this one together, we're going to press this, and we have these little squares to worry about. So I'm going to sew this together, and I'm going to be right back. Okay, so this was the one where I had the flat side matching and the pointy side matching. Once this is pressed, you can see that this one doesn't need any trimming at all. This one just has kind of what I guess I would call a double dog ear that I'm going to have to trim off. This one over here I had opposite, so I've got a little dog ear on one side and a dog ear on the other. I have to admit, I'm not sure which way is considered right. I think they both have their merits. I think the whole idea is that we're just starting with 2 half square triangles and we're sewing them together into this block. So once we've done that, we're going to do that on all 4 of these, and then we have these little squares over here. On these little squares, you're just going to draw a line, same as we did in our previous block, and we're going to sew right on that line. Once we've done that, we're just going to go ahead and trim that off. And again, I tend to just add my little 1/4 inch seam allowance afterwards. Some people save these and turn these into mini half square triangles. I do not. And then I'm going to press this open. All right, so that makes this block look like this, which is kind of cute. And so then you're going to do that same thing with these 4 outside blocks. Next, what we're going to do is our flying geese units. So let's start with the ones here in the center. We already have all of our little pieces cut. So all we're going to do is take this one, flip it over right sides together, and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. All right, and I went ahead and pressed it open, and now I have my next piece. I'm going to lay that down, line that up. I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch right there. And again, don't worry about those things, because then what's going to happen is I'm going to press this open, and then again I'm going to cut my little dog ear off of here and here. It'll look just like this, and I'm going to do that with all 4. Okay, we have all 4 of these done, and we have all 4 of these done. I just have to trim off a couple dog ears there, but I wanted to mention 2 more things before we continue. I probably should have mentioned them earlier, and that is that whenever you're cutting blocks and you have a bunch of bias to worry about, it's generally a good idea to cut and sew on the same day, because sometimes your bias can relax just a little bit. So if you cut all of these pieces and then walk away for a couple days, you might find that you have a little bit more trouble than usual. The other thing that I generally suggest is that you use some sort of a starch. I do like Best Press. I put it in my little mister, and I like to make sure that everything is pretty heavily starched so that, again, I don't have any trouble and everything lays nice and flat. All right, so I've got my 4 outer blocks done, my 4 inner ones, and now, of course, these are going to go together the exact same way as these. Okay, so we have all of these done, and let's talk about how we're going to sew these 2 together. When we sew these together, that's what creates kind of this really cool design. And I want to talk about 2 things. One is where you sew these together. So since we've got white thread on a white fabric, what I did is I took my friction marker to draw, so you can see this is where the seam is. This is where the seam is. So when we folded that, there's an X. So when you do your 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to be coming right through the center of that X. It's kind of a cool little trick, but once I'm going to show you this way, once you've folded these together, I would flip it over this way. When I sew my 1/4 inch, it just automatically, you end up just 1 needle above that X, and that way when you press this open, you end up so that this point, you haven't blunted that point at all. So the other thing I want to mention is with pressing. Typically we end up pressing to the dark, and that's what'll happen so that you don't have anything that shows over. However, this seam right here, there's a lot of bulk there. There's a lot of excess fabric, even though we've trimmed off our little dog ears. So for me, if you were to press over here, you would have a lot of bulk for your long arm quilter. So that's why I press it this way. You can also do dress seams. A lot of people will do that. I don't say that that's wrong. I just say that I don't personally do that, because for me, I want there to be more between the outside world and my batting than just those threads. So that's why we like to press it open. Or I mean press it over. All right, so we've got all of these. I'm going to press this one. I'm going to sew these 2 together, these 2 together, and then I'm going to sew everything together in my little 9 patch. Press it, and we'll be done. Okay, here it is. So this is our block number 4, and I think it's actually a pretty fun block. I have to admit, I don't often do flying geese that way or half square triangles that way, but it was kind of nice to know that everything was cut exactly right, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and everything did end up just the way that it was supposed to. I also think it's sort of interesting, the color choices. So this was our little scrappy choice, and this is the colors according to the kit. So it's fun how different they look. And if you are doing scrappy blocks and you're making 3 blocks or 2 blocks, maybe you could even mix up your colors just a little bit. So just to review, we've done block number 1, we did block number 2, block number 3, block number 4, and in 2 weeks we're going to do block number 5. So keep those rulers handy because we're doing more of the quarter square triangle blocks. Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.